Yeah. Well, why don't you just lay out right here? We'll get you a little pillow and. Excuse me. Just poke him. Just poke him.
Okay, we can get started now. Sit down.
All right.
9 o'clock. What you doing so early?
I just happened to meet. Yeah, I am sick. But.
Okay.
All right. Good morning. You'll have to bear with me. Barely. I got a little overheated on Thursday. Went out and mowed the lawn and didn't hydrate. Now I'm kind of iffy. So what we might do, depending on how this morning goes, we might curtail afternoon and go home. I know you'd love that, wouldn't you? We'll tell William we're going to do that anyway. He can go on home. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But I got out Thursday and I just got overheated and I didn't hydrate enough, and now I'm just kind of not feeling that fantastic. But forgive me if I cough a lot. And the pollen is just killing me. And then I got out and burned some stuff yesterday. It's just been. I got some. I thank you though. I do. I got some, and I'm trying to keep the water going down. As far as announcements are concerned this morning, I don't really have a whole lot. Next week, of course, we've got our Friends and Family Day. What we're doing is we're asking everybody to bring. We're going to be having barbecue. We're going to get that from one of the local vendors, and what we're asking is that everybody bring something that goes along with barbecue. Mac and cheese, collard greens, coleslaw, potato salad, hard boiled, all the stuff that would normally go along with a barbecue lunch. So bring something along those lines. I'll make that announcement again this morning, so let everybody know. But all of the meat and the buns and the drinks will be provided. We just need sides, okay? So, but we're looking forward to that. Got a brother coming in from Texas that's going to be delivering the lesson and the sermon on Sunday for us. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from him. So we had this last year. It went really well. Looking for a pretty good crowd, too. So if you haven't made a friend or a family yet, go make one. Bring them next Sunday. Yes. He'll be doing the lesson and the sermon next Sunday. And then yeah. So good to see Paige and Dan and DJ back with us. They're traveling. Dan's leaving tomorrow, correct? So, prayers for his safety as he travels back to New Mexico. Not to be confused with the old Mexico. Yeah, it's not the same. Paige's going to be here for a little while, and then she's going to be heading back. DJ just sort of comes and goes as he wants. But pray for their safety as they travel. So we got some birthdays today. Your birthday today? Oh, Pat. Yeah, Pat. I thought you said Pat's birthday. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's next week. Anyway, it's Paige's birthday today, so wish her happy birthday.
There you, Paige. Happy birthday to you. What are you, about 75? You look good. Look at your mother looking.
Watch out.
Yeah, she watched out and said, I'll take care of you.
Anybody that we need to remember in our prayers? Anything new that we've got going on? Okay, well, that's good. Everybody seems to be either doing well or recovering, or nobody's gotten worse anyway. I ask that you continue to remember Heather's cousin, Dawn, in your prayers. They're supposed to be getting some news back about her biopsy and figure out what's going on, what kind of treatment, if any, they're going to be able to do for that issue that she's got for that tumor. Hopefully, they're going to be able to figure something out, and they have maybe an aggressive treatment, but we don't know yet. Okay, but if they don't, it's not a good situation at all. If they are not able to treat it aggressively, it's not going to be good for her at all. So the hope is that they figure out a course of treatment and they get out there and get on it. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Yeah. continue to remember Ryan so well and his transplant situation. They're still doing tests and everything like that to figure out what they can do for him, and if they're going to be able to proceed with his transplant. So, all right. Yes, ma'am. Good. Apparently, they're not as worried. If they're not worried about it, then we won't worry about it. Well, good. Glad you didn't have to go in the hospital, because that's never a good thing. It really isn't. Stay out of the hospitals if you can, where all the sick people are, right? All right, good. Good to see y'all. Good to see y'all with us. You know, especially because of something like that. I know pneumonia's been a bugaboo in the last couple of years, hasn't it? Yeah. All right. So good to see Miss Gail with us. Glad she was able to avoid going to the doctor, or going to the hospital anyway. Anybody else? All right. Yes, ma'am. Okay. 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 What's his name? Michael Powell? Okay. Michael Powell. His father passed away. Oh, I hate to hear that. Okay. Anybody else? What's that? Yeah, the Bartons are traveling for a funeral. Miss Anita's cousin passed. Very young, 52. Passed away. Anybody else? All right. All right, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer then. Father in heaven, we're thankful for the day that you've blessed us with, Lord, and we're grateful that we're all here safely. We ask, Lord, that you bless those who are traveling to come to this place now, and we pray that you give them safety. We ask, Lord, that you be with those who are sick and are under doctor's care. We ask that you be with those who are undergoing treatments or testing and all of those things. We ask that you be with Don Wilson, and ask that you be with Ryan Stillwell, and we ask that you be with all those who are still trying to figure out what's going on with their health, and that you be with the doctors that are working with them. We're thankful for Ms. Gill being here and not having to go to the hospital. We're grateful for her recovery from her pneumonia. We ask that you continue to be with her. We ask that you be with the Powells in the loss of their loved one. We ask that you comfort them and strengthen them in a way that only you can. We ask that you be with those who are traveling because of the loss of a loved one. The Powells and the Bartons are both on the road because of that, and we pray, Lord, your safety, that you give them that as they go to and from their places that they're going to. We ask that you be with those who are away from their families for lengths of time. We ask that you be with the missionaries that are abroad, and we ask that you be with those who are in our armed forces and strengthen them, comfort them, and keep them safe. We thank you, Lord, for all that you do for us. We're grateful for how you bless us. We ask, Lord, that you continue to provide for us in the way that we need. Be with those who are mindful of things that are going on in their families. A lot of times, Lord, we don't know what's going on in individual families, whether it's emotional issues or financial issues or all of the things that just go on in our everyday lives. We pray, Lord, that you be with people who are struggling for whatever reason. Help us to be of assistance to them in whatever way that we possibly can, so that they can see you working through us. Thank you, Lord, for everything that you do for us, and we're especially grateful for your Son. It's through him we pray. Amen. I thought that we could start in on a new study. I wasn't here last week, but we'll have this week, and then next week, of course, we'll be doing something else, and then we'll continue on. But I thought we could talk about the book of Exodus, and the reason I thought about this was for Lads to Leaders. This is the book that they went through for their course of study. And when the girls were studying, I started looking at it, and there was a lot of lessons. They don't get too much into it because they tend to go a little bit more of a surface. It's hard for them to do a really in-depth study of the book just simply because of the time frame. But the theme of this year's Lads Leaders study and convention is I am. And of course, we read that in the first couple of chapters of Exodus. That's how God refers to himself. So I thought that this would be a good study for us for the next couple of months, maybe through the summer months, the idea of the book of Exodus. So if you want, let's go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 1. You know, there's several chapters, so we might have to maybe rush through a couple of these. A lot of them, they're more of a narrative. Really, to me, the Exodus really, I know a lot of people like the account of the plagues and all that kind of stuff, but for me, Exodus really starts to pick up later on in the book when God starts to give instructions to the Hebrews about how they are to worship Him and how they are to provide for the tabernacle of the Lord and all of that. That's really, I find that more fascinating than even the account of the plagues. But anyway, I thought we could start there, and we'll kind of go through this. If you got anything to add, let me know. Just speak up, and we'll stop, and I want to hear from it what everybody has to say. You had the same idea I had. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, here starting in chapter 1, in verse 1, it says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel," or the sons of Jacob. You know, Jacob had his name changed to Israel, right? All right. These are the names of the son of Israel, or Jacob, who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. So we remember this. Why did they end up going to Egypt? There was a famine, right? You know, God, the land that they were living in, there was no food. So Jacob says, "I want you to go," and we read of the account where his sons go to Egypt, and Joseph meets them there. They didn't recognize him, and we remember all of this from the last part of the book of Genesis. But they're all in Egypt, and remember God made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, didn't He? All right, and the son of promise was, of course, Isaac, and then, of course, Isaac had Jacob, and the idea that promise continued on. We think a lot of times that we think we understand what God's the manifestation of God's promises. We think we understand that, right? When we ask God to bless us, we think, okay, well, God's going to read my mind. He's going to give me exactly what it is I'm looking for. Do you think that when He made that promise to Abraham, that He was going to provide for that promise through a famine? Why would you think that? That would make no sense, would it? Well, I know how God's going to do it. He's going to bring me to this place, and then I'm going to have a son, and then that son is going to get married, and then he's going to have a son, and then pretty soon that son is going to have 12 sons, and then there's going to be a famine in the land, and we're going to have to pick up and move all the way across this land of Midian, and we're going to wind up in Egypt, and from this point on, then what was going to happen is we're going to enlarge ourselves, we're going to become fruitful, we're going to multiply, and then we're going to be enslaved for 300, 400 years. And through that, God's going to bring us up, and He's going to take us to another place well after all of us are dead. No, that's not what we think. We think that God's going to magnify us because of our present situation. That's not always the case. And we read that in the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. God uses, we got to remember this, folks, God uses negative things to enlarge us. He uses negative things to cause us to increase and to be fruitful. So we have to be careful that we don't say, well, God has forgotten us. We're in a bad situation, so we just need to kind of hunker down and just sort of wait. And eventually God will do for us or maybe God's forgotten us and He's not going to do anything for us. We got to make sure that we do the very best we can in the situation that we find ourselves. All right? It's no coincidence that the church saw its biggest period of growth during one of the most tumultuous and terrifying times for the early Christians, right? When did the church grow the most? When it was being persecuted. It's incredible. I mean, it was exponential growth. It was each one brought 3, and each one of those brought, and it was just exponential growth, and it was during a case of really terrible persecution. So we got to remember that we can't look at things in the same way. We got to remember that God doesn't look at things the same way we do. All right? God works on His own timeline, and God took His own sweet time to bring the nation of Israel to its form that we're going to read about. You know, several hundred years it took from them to get to this point. So, we got to always remember that God's working, and we may not recognize what it is He's about to do. All right. So they're all in Egypt, each of them with his household, and then it goes through the list of the sons of Israel. Of course, Joseph was already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all of his brothers and all that generation. So it's kind of like they were here, now they're not. There's no brooking sentimentality or anything like that. He says, Joseph died, all of his brothers died, and all that's left are the generations that came afterwards. But, in verse 7, but the people of Israel. So this still goes back to the idea of Jacob, right? They're considered the people of Israel. But the people of Israel were what? They did what? They were fruitful, and they increased greatly, and they multiplied, and they grew. So he's kind of hitting the point, right? He keeps hitting that nail on the head. They did what? They were fruitful, they increased greatly, they multiplied, and grew exceedingly strong. He wants to make sure that they understand that they didn't just wilt away in the Egyptian heat, did they? Everywhere that God has placed His people with the intent of making them something, that's what happens. Now, did they do that of their own strength? Did they have we ever done that in of our own strength? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, if we think about it, the time in which Christ came to this earth and died on the cross and later established His church was probably, if you thought about a time in which that would be a good time to do that, from our standpoint, it would be the worst time in the world to do something like that. It would make no sense. Why would you go at this particular point in time to establish something like the church? But we got to remember that God doesn't think the way that we think. All right, He knows when is the best time to do anything. That's when He chose to do it. All right, it had already been established. He knew what was going to happen. He knew that this would be the very best time to establish the church. Well, this is the same thing that's going on with the children of Israel. He brought them to this place. He brought them to that place at that time under those circumstances so that they could do what? Grow. All right, and when you look at the numbers, how they grew in Egypt, it's astounding. All right, we'll look at that here in a couple minutes. Excuse me. Now there arose a new king over Egypt. Now the problem with this new king, remember that what was the situation between Joseph and the old Pharaoh? Was there a good relationship or a bad relationship? Yeah. The old Pharaoh loved Joseph. Why did he love Joseph? He did. Remember what was the situation between Joseph and Pharaoh? Why did Pharaoh acknowledge Joseph as being a prophet of God? He interpreted his dream. But we got to remember this. And I'm not going to go back into Genesis to talk about this, but remember this as well: that after Pharaoh put Joseph in a position of power, Joseph proceeded to rob the people of Egypt of about all of their land, because the famine came. And then what did he do? He says, "Oh, we've got plenty of food, so why don't you come and we'll give you food? But in order to get the food, you have to sign over your property." And pretty soon, Pharaoh owned virtually all of the land in Egypt because he had brought all of the grain. He had established it in silos. Remember the 7 years, good years and 7 bad years. So he had these storehouses all over Egypt so that the people could come and get grain. But in order to do that, they had to give up all of their stuff. Okay, this goes to tell you: be very careful about giving the government too much power, because that's what they want to do. If they can, they're going to take what you got. All right, so be careful about something like that. All right, so Pharaoh loved Joseph because he had enlarged him by his being where he was going to be, as second in command. All right, but as all of these things happened, there arose a new king, and this new king had no relationship with Joseph, had no relationship with the children of Israel. He didn't regard them as anything special. And he withdrew the privileges from them. I'm not going to get into the genealogy of the pharaohs, but suffice it to say that this is a man who had no real relationship with Joseph. All right. So what does he say? And he says to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty." Well, yeah, God enlarged them. That's why they're as big as they are. That's why they're as great as they are. "Come, let us deal shrewdly with them." In other words, let's be very careful about how we allow these people to grow and to gain in our midst, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. We have to remember that Egypt was a very desirable property. Everybody understood this. Egypt went in and out of foreign occupation time and time again, and it's been that way all throughout history. They would fall to outside enemies, and then they would regain their strength and they would regain their lands. Then they would fall again. Alexander the Great knew this, and he said, Egypt is a great place to go because they produced a lot of food. That Nile overflowing of the Nile River twice a year provided a lot of food. So this was a very desirable portion of property. So let's go down there and let's take it. So the Egyptians were constantly in fear of someone coming in, taking their possessions and their lands, and making them slaves in their own house. Okay? So we're worried about this, so let's do this. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. And they built for Pharaoh storehouses, Pithom and Ramses. So this kind of lays to rest. They didn't build the pyramids for the pharaohs. That's something out of the movies. They didn't build the pyramids, but they did build storehouses for him. All right? But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. Sounds like God, right? The more people are oppressed, the more God's going to provide for them. All right? That's the way God works. He doesn't want his people to be miserable. He doesn't want his people to be unhappy and not provided for. He provides for them. You know, we're fortunate, folks. We live in one of the most prosperous times in human history. And we may not see God's enlarging of us the way that the early Christians and going even further back, the people of God, the way they saw it, but God still continues to provide for it. All right? We live in a very good time to be alive, especially to be a good time to be alive as a Christian. All right, so we never need to take that for granted. All right? So, excuse me. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. This reminds me a great deal of the situation in South Africa back in for a long time, back all the way through the mid-'80s. Remember, the white Afrikaners were a minority in that country, and it's interesting that this minority was able to maintain control over the majority. Well, they did it with force. I mean, brute force. The police force, the army, everybody was under control of this minority. So the majority was basically, I'm not saying enslaved, but they were certainly enthralled to this minority government. This is much the same way. If you control the way to forcefully control someone, then you're kind of in the catbird seat, right? This is essentially what's happening in Egypt. The native Egyptians were vastly outnumbered by the Israelites. Okay, so what did they have to do? They had to be in control of the force, and that's essentially what's happening. So they ruthless. Let's see. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. Can you imagine that? You know, you've got these people, and you're scared of them. I mean, they're living in your own country. You invited them in, and they're in your own country, and now you're scared to death of them. Huh? Okay. So we got to be, the idea of being in dread, that's essentially what's happening. And remember, the Israelites didn't worship the gods of the Egyptians, did they? Mm-mm. Now, were they open to them? Yes. Because if you remember, Joshua has to tell the people of Israel, put away the idols. Okay? The idols that you took out of Egypt with you, put them away. Because from this point on, you cannot worship these gods and be acceptable to God, Jehovah. Can't do it. Okay? So, it says they were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service and mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. And all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. So that's prong one of their attack. First thing we're going to do is we're going to subjugate them. We're going to make them work. We're going to make them slaves to us. Now, we got to remember that this was in addition to what they already did. This was not something this was not their daily occupation. Okay? Their daily occupation were shepherds. That's what they did. The Egyptians hated shepherding. To them, it was unclean work. Okay? So they made the Israelites were shepherds in the land of Egypt. In addition to what they were already doing, they would impress them into work. An Egyptian could see an Israelite. It wouldn't be an Israelite at the time, a Hebrew. He could see a Hebrew and he could make him work for him in whatever capacity he saw fit, and under force of law. Much in the same way in Roman occupation, a Roman citizen, a Roman soldier could see a person from another land, from another nationality, and he could impress work upon him. Same thing that's going on in Egypt right now. All right. So the king of Egypt, that's prong one. Then prong two, we're going to see prong two, population control. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of them was named Shiphrah, and the other a puah. When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, you shall live. Shows that ungodly men have sought to kill children from the very beginning, right? Never changed. You'll see that today. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. I like this because it shows their loyalty. It says that they feared God. The reason they did that wasn't simply out of obstinance. It was because they feared God. So what does that mean? God was not amenable to this, was he? He didn't want to see children. No. God sees life as important. He sees life as precious. And we should feel the same way. When we see, is that rain? It is. All right. All right, so they feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them to do. So you think about these midwives had to decide, didn't they? They had to make a choice. Because remember, the king of Egypt could have them killed. That was his prerogative. If he wanted them gone, if they weren't in obedience, he could have them killed. They had to weigh out, who do we fear? Do we fear God? Do we fear the king of Egypt? And God always comes out on top. All right, so we have to ask ourselves this question, who do we fear? We have to think about that, right? When we have to decide who we are going to be in obedience to, and we think about the punishment that can come from government or punishment that can come from another person, we always have to decide, who do we serve? Who do we serve? All right? And they decided that they were going to serve God. So they feared God, did not do, but they let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women." This is backhanded compliment towards the Hebrew wives, right? The Hebrew women. "For they are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwife comes to them." So what is he saying? What are they saying? By the time we get there, they've already given birth. I like that they're not like the Egyptian women. Apparently the Egyptian women were little princesses, weren't able to handle it. So they had to wait, and they were just sort of basically waited until the midwives come. The Hebrew women, hey, we got things to do. Let's go. So they were giving birth before the midwives actually got there. So now here's the thing. We read this and we think of, well, the midwives are lying to the Pharaoh. We don't know that. Nowhere does it say that they were lying to him. It's entirely possible that this was absolutely true. They were pretty sturdy people. I mean, they had to be, right? Because of the situation that they found themselves. So it's entirely possible that this was absolutely 100% true. And hey, listen, this is the case. So we're going to give the Hebrew midwives the benefit of the doubt. All right, this is exactly what was occurring. And it's entirely true. It's entirely possible that it was true because remember, God was causing them to prosper. And this could have been part of what God allowed to happen in order for them to prosper. Yes. Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure because it doesn't give us a whole lot of evidence. But it apparently the Egyptian king was satisfied with the answer, and it could have been that even he got to the point where, and this is my personal opinion, this idea that for a great many civilizations, the idea if the child is not yet out of the birth canal, not completely come out of the birth canal, then it's not truly born. If it's not truly born, then it's not truly a child. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Okay. Sounds very, especially in today's society. Sounds very familiar. If that child is still somewhat in the mother, then it's not truly born yet. It's not become. And this probably had a little bit to do with the idea about the Egyptian concept of what constituted a human being yet. Remember their idea about not to get too much into it, but the idea about how life was bestowed. And the idea that it did not yet have what we would call a soul, so to speak. And there's still today people who believe that. There was a group of people, I don't know if they still believe this, but the idea that it was based on their interpretation of the scriptures that a child didn't receive his soul until 8 days when he was circumcised. Okay, based on what they're reading of the scriptures. We know that's not true. Right? It doesn't make any sense. But that was the concept, that a child wasn't really human yet, or it wasn't really a living person yet. It was human, but it wasn't a person. We got to be very careful that we don't put conditions that are not there. And we got to remember, scientific progress has shown us that in the human, in the mother, children are capable of, I wouldn't say laughing, but that behavior that looks like laughter, capable of breathing, the heartbeat. They can grasp things, they recognize things. When the mother speaks, the child, yeah. I mean, and like I said, not to get too far into that idea, but this probably had a little bit to do with the idea about the Egyptians and their concept of becoming a human. And it could be that after the child was born and had come out of the mother and it was resting in the mother and it was nursing at the mother, then they could say, well, it's a human being at this particular point, okay, and we're not going to do anything to it. But in any case, he was obviously satisfied with it because we don't read where anything happened to them. He was satisfied with the answer. Yeah. Yeah, entirely possible. But all we have is the narrative, so that's what we have to kind of go with. I don't want to divine too much into it. That's just my personal, just in reading it and thinking about it. But anyway, it says, and so God dealt well with the midwives. So he was perfectly satisfied with their answer. And God does not brook a lie, does he? So God dealt with them. He dealt well with them. So it tells me that the thing that was occurring with the Egyptians, the Egyptian mothers and the Hebrew mothers, was perfectly amenable to God because he said he dealt well with the midwives. But here's the thing. Remember, under all of these circumstances, the people multiplied and grew very strong. So in spite of all of the efforts of the Egyptians, the Hebrew people continued to grow. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all of his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So he extended that, didn't he? You don't kill them on the birthing stool now, you kill them even when they're born. So he's ramped this up. He's stepped up his campaign to population control. Let the women live, let the girls live, kill the boys. All right? Chapter 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. He put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. His sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the river while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman. She took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the child was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." The sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." All right. So again, God's providing his providence for the nation of Israel. All of this is in preparation for what's going to occur later on. Very interesting that not only did he provide for the child, but he actually brought the child's mother to him to provide him to be a nurse for him, and then paid her to do so. God's providence is manifold, and it's nobody would have thought about this. If you wrote this, nobody could write it like this. This is the way that God provides for his people. And the whole point was to provide a man named Moses that would come and lead God's people out of a land of oppression and take them to a new home that had been provided for them for generations before. The idea that the daughter of Pharaoh, we got to remember what the Nile was to the nation of Egypt. Okay, it was mystical. It had the idea of deity, the Nile River. It was the source of all of their food. It had almost godlike qualities. Okay, so when the Pharaoh's daughter was bathing in that, she was partaking in almost a religious ritual. And then when she sees this basket in the bulrushes and she sees a child in there, remember what her pagan mind, what was going through her pagan mind. What was she thinking when she sees this child in the basket? Yeah, the river has provided this for us. Okay, and all of their gods and all of the things that are going on. What came out of the Nile River was a gift from the gods. Okay, so she didn't look at, she could have said, "Well, it's a Hebrew child. It's a boy. Kill it. It's supposed to be dead. It's supposed to be dead anyway." So what she's saying is the child was thrown into the river, and the river has provided it back in a basket for me, because here I am in the right place at the right time to receive this gift from the God. So God's using their pagan mind to work against them. I mean, it's just like I said, God's providence is astounding how He was able to make this happen in the way that it's supposed to happen. It even says she named him Moses because I drew him out of the water. All right. So at this point, everything's moving along quite well, right? God's providing for the Israelites. He's causing them to multiply. He's causing them to increase. He's providing for them in spite of their being impressed into service on a regular basis to provide for the Egyptians and their storehouses. He's keeping them from being massacred in the womb, and then He's keeping them from being slaughtered and thrown into the river. So, so far He's providing for them quite well. Well, He continues on. He has to put them in the right place at the right time for the right reason, doesn't He? Okay. Moses can't just grow up in a vacuum. He has to be in the right place at the right time for what God has in store for him. All right, so we're going to see how God provides for that. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So even then, Moses had a sense of right and wrong, didn't he? This was his people. He knew who he was. I think the movies and all of the TV shows and everything like that have talked about the land Moses, they don't really go into his understanding about who he was. He knew he was a Hebrew. His adoptive mother, Pharaoh's daughter, allowed him to live because he was a gift from the gods. That's why he was allowed to remain. Otherwise, he would have been dead and thrown back into the river. So he knew he was a sojourner in a strange place, being in the household of Pharaoh. I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm here. He grew up amongst opulence and luxury, and everything that he wanted was provided for him, being an adoptive son of Pharaoh's daughter. But he knew who his people were, and he said that he went out and he looked upon his people and their labors. And what did he see? When he saw this Egyptian beating one of his countrymen, what did he do? His instinct of right and wrong did what? It made him do something. He took action. Killed him. He struck him and killed him. Now, we don't know if that was intent to kill him, but that's what happened. So it doesn't matter whether his intent was there or not. He struck that Egyptian and killed him, and now he knew he was in for it. Because no matter what his position was, this was a Hebrew killing an Egyptian. That wasn't going to stand. All right? So what does he say? Went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered and said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Uh-oh. What's happened? Yeah. Can't hide it, right? No, whether somebody found the Egyptian buried in the sand and dragged him out and they've been looking for whoever killed him, whatever the reason was, maybe he was seen. It says that he looked this way and that, so it's entirely possible that somebody stumbled across this Egyptian in the sand, put two and two together, and in a very primitive form of Sherlock Holmes, they figured out who killed this guy. Who else would have done it? Now what do? It says he was afraid. He says, surely the thing is known. They figured me out. So what does he do? He goes on the lam, right? He flees from the presence of Moses, or Pharaoh, and he goes to the land of Midian, and he sits down by a well. All right, so God has provided for them. He has kept them from being massacred in the womb. He's kept Moses from being massacred after he's born. He puts him in the right place at the right time. He puts him into a place where he will have to flee from Pharaoh. Why do you think he needed to do that? What would have happened had Moses continued to live in the house of Pharaoh? What possibly could have happened? Okay, Could it be that he would have lost his sense of who he was? He could have gotten so used to being an Egyptian, even an adopted Egyptian, that he would have lost his sense about who he was and who God was. He would have gotten used to that luxury and finally just given himself over into pagan idolatry, lost his sense of right and wrong. At this point, he says, hey, it was wrong for that Egyptian to strike my brother. But who knows if a couple of years had gone by, he would have gotten so accustomed to it that that would have been part of who he was and how he lived and how things were. He would have lost his sense of right and wrong. He said, well, maybe they deserve it. And gotten into that thought process of, these are slaves. They don't mean anything. Their lives are essentially useless, except for hard work for me. Okay? Mm-hmm. There's multiple reasons that this had to happen. There's multiple reasons, and again, we can't. If we look at it on the surface and say, "Oh no, this is the only thing," then we're missing the point. God knew where he needed to be. God brought him to a place where he needed to be. He took him to this place. So, yeah. Yes. Probably for the same reason that Pharaoh's daughter saw him as a gift from the God. We fail to realize, I think, sometimes because we're not superstitious pagans, that we understand God and God has a mindset. God has a desire and a purpose for what we're doing. See, when you're superstitious, things happen for no reason. They happen for a reason, but not in a way that we're able to discern. Okay, that's superstitious. Okay, this happened, but it happened through no discernible process. See, God has a thought process, doesn't he? We read it from the very beginning of Scripture, don't we? I mean, from the very beginning of the Bible, we read where God has a process in mind. The great thing about our God is that he's written down his thought process. He's told us, this is what's going to happen. I made mankind. He is going to fall away because he's human. He's going to fall away from me. Therefore, I will provide a process by which he can come back to me. And Moses is an integral part of this process. This is my idea, this is my process, and I'm going to show you all throughout history exactly what's going to happen, and it's going to culminate here with the death of my son on the cross. See, the Egyptians didn't understand. The Egyptians had no thought process like that. They didn't worship a god like that. To them, their gods just acted. There was no design or process by it. Their gods might decide, hey, tomorrow we're going to overflow the banks of the Nile and we're going to kill 1,000 people. That's just the way that gods are. They're just going to decide something, or they're going to do something. It doesn't really matter my idea. They don't really love me. They're just going to. This time they might provide for me. The next time they might kill my son. Okay, so that idea of superstition was a huge portion of their ideas and their religion, so to speak. So when they said, "Hey, this thing is from the gods," there was no ifs, ands, or buts. They accepted it as it was, and they just sort of went with it. So when Pharaoh's daughter went down there and found that child and accepted that child as a gift from the gods, that was the end of it. There was no more to be spoken of. And they may be wondering, okay, what are we going to do with this Hebrew? Well, the Nile gave him to us. Well, what do we do with him? I don't know, but he gave him to us. What are we supposed to do? Well, we'll provide for him. He'll be a part of the household. And that was the idea. They didn't understand because they had no real understanding of God. To them, it was just mindless superstition. So there's a reason that he didn't kill him, even knowing, she even said, this is one of the Hebrew children. But the river gave him to us, so I guess I'll, accept him as a gift. What that gift was entailing, they didn't understand it at all. But there it is. All right, real quick, we're going to finish this up. Excuse me. Now, the priest of Midian, the priest of Midian, not a priest, the priest of Midian. So there were people who continued to worship God even while the children of Israel, the Hebrews, were in Egypt. The worship of God was still going on. We've got to remember that. God has always provided people for himself. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. So he was doing something righteous, right? Moses was a righteous man. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and he even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." Now, what foreign land is it? He had no. This was a man without a land, wasn't he? He really had no land. And then after all that, he fled both of his peoples, and then came to Midian. So he was a wanderer. You know, he had never had a home. You think about it, he had never really lived. He only lived in his parents' home for what? 3 months. And then after that, his mom gave him back to the Egyptian. He didn't belong in the home of the Egyptians. Then when he did something against the law, he had to flee to another country. So Moses was constantly a wanderer. He never quit wandering. I mean, you talk about the wandering Jews, Moses was the original wandering Jew. All right? So, continuing on. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, so the one that had enslaved them, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. So apparently the man who came in after this, when we read, was even worse than the one who came before. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Now we got to remember this. When it says that God remembered, it does not mean that God had forgotten them. God never forgets. When it says remembered, it means that it was brought. It's been brought afresh, and now He's about to do something. It's come to the surface. God is about to follow through on the promise that He made to them. Remember, their slavery was part of a bigger plan. You know, He wasn't saying, "Oh, I forgot. I'm going to rescue you from this slavery." No, you had to do this in order for me to take you to a better place. All right, we'll not this next Sunday. Sunday after that, we'll pick back up on this again.